Hi and welcome to Best in Tesla. So we are seeing many of the big boys like GM, Ford and Volkswagen and many of the German automakers are slowing down the EV transition. I personally think this is a big mistake, as the EV demand is clearly still there, as EVs are still rising fast and the old legacy automakers are literally handing over market share to Tesla and the Chinese. As Tesla is no longer a little car company in a niche market, they are as big as the German premium brands. So while Tesla balanced their production and sales very well, the auto industry has a 40% overcapacity compared to the demand. So what will happen when the ICE business will fall another 40 or 50 or 60% over the rest of this decade when they already have an overcapacity of 40%? Meanwhile, EVs are no longer just for the early adopters, but have entered the early majority. And having Tesla still being here for the early majority is actually a huge milestone for the inventor in the field. So this is looking very grim for the old guys, but very promising for Tesla. So let's check it all out and let's dive right in. So, the automotive industry have 40% more capacity than there is demand. So that is also why the industry has a very little return on capital and are working with razor-thin margins. But Tesla's return of capital is just insane. Their gigafactories are probably some of the best return on investment in the entire industry. But someone like GM got bailed out in 2009 because the US government didn't want to lose all the jobs that GM creates. But the problem is that GM today only produce less than 6 million cars a year, while in 2016 they've sold over 10 million cars a year. So their output has fallen by more than 40%, but they have only cut the workforce by 25%. So GM is still a very heavy machine that has too much capacity at their factories than they have demand and a much bigger workforce than they probably need. And they have just agreed to a deal with the UAW, so now their cost of all those many workers has probably gone up something like 25%. We are still missing some of the details of the deal. But this is also a big reason why no one of the US automakers like Ford and GM does not have a small affordable vehicle anymore, because they could not really make them profitable anymore. And why you can't really buy a normal small passenger sedan car in the US from a US automaker today, as they pretty much only have pickup trucks, SUVs and crossovers. But that was where Toyota and the Japanese came in. They were able to make a profit on their small cars in the US. But today, Toyota only has 0.2% operating margins in the US. So they are barely making money in the US anymore with their ICE vehicles. And now comes the expensive shift to EVs. Toyota is not doing as well as many people think. They also only have about 2.6% operating margin in Europe. Actually, about 67% of Toyota's profits come from Japan, where they have 12.1% operating margins. So they are actually in quite the trouble with this shift to EVs, as they are hardly making money as it is. But someone like Tesla is making profits, and actually good profits on their vehicles in the US, and the Model 3 is a mid-size sedan. Tesla is actually doing with the electric vehicle what Ford and GM couldn't even do with their ICE vehicles, having a profitable mid-size sedan. A testimony to what an accomplishment Tesla has done here. Tesla has become more effective at making cars no matter propulsion than the old US automakers. And Tesla will even come with a new car in 2025, the compact next-gen vehicle, and will be able to sell that for about $25,000 with a healthy 20% margin. This is something none of the other automakers has ever been able to do. Not even Toyota has this kind of margin on their small, cheap compact cars. So because Tesla has been so laser focused on getting costs down, making innovation and improvement every single day to their cars and to the production line, and helping their suppliers, Tesla has been able to make a more sustainable business with selling electric cars than the old legacy automakers have by selling their ICE cars. Probably because they have never been forced to, because they were making most of their living on service and repairs through the dealership and of course car loans. But Tesla has turned that business on its head. And this is all happening at the same time we see the legacy automakers losing insane amount of money on selling EVs, and why they are now slowing down and delaying their EV push to not lose too much money so they can show a profitable business to their investors in next quarter. But this will only, in my opinion, hit them even harder when they later this decade still has not increased their EV sales significantly, but the EV market has grown significantly. So they are leaving market share up for grabs for Tesla and the Chinese to take. And we see the old guys trying to cut costs to make their business look good, but this will eventually come crashing down. But it is not just the US automakers. The same goes for Germany. Mercedes is having trouble selling their EVs and still losing a lot of money on them. And Audi originally wanted to present the new SUV BEV Q6 e-tron in 2022, but this has been postponed to 2023, and last week it was announced that the vehicle will now be presented for the first time in 2024. And of course, we all know Volkswagen is having trouble selling their EVs in the volumes they hoped for, so they have also slowed down their EV ramp. The old guys have come with a lot of promises and goals and target for their EVs, but they have pretty much failed on them all. I know Elon gets a lot of hate because he's being too optimistic about full self-driving, and they have been delayed with the Cybertruck and semi-truck and the Roadster, but we have just been through 3 really tough years with COVID and chip shortage and so on, but Tesla has still managed to bring production as promised despite these setbacks. They promised 500,000 units in 2020 all the way back in 2014, and that was exactly what they did, even though many said it was absurd. And then Tesla said they will grow with 50% compound annual growth rate from there on out for the foreseeable future, and that is exactly what they're doing. And I know some are now talking up Toyota again because they're showing off gigacasting and solid-state batteries and are talking EVs once in a while, but they are still not all in on EVs. They are still betting on hydrogen, even though they have just been out admitting that their hydrogen car, the Mirai, was a failure. Remember when Toyota said back in 2015 that they expected to have their hydrogen Mirai selling 30,000 units in 2020. And we even saw articles about how Tesla's real competition was not electric, it was hydrogen cars. But again, this all came down to people not believing Tesla and their target of 500,000 units in 2020, but they did believe Toyota and their target of 30,000 Mirais in 2020. But in 2020, Tesla hit their target, but Toyota sold about 2,000 units of the Mirai. So they only missed their target by 93%. Then we had COVID, and then the sales rised a bit as many were looking for alternative to the ICE cars, but in 2022 their sales dropped again because people probably found out it simply just doesn't work, as James from Top Gear has also just been out saying he's selling his Mirai because their infrastructure is nowhere to be seen. And now Toyota has even been out admitting that their Mirai has not been successful. Hydrogen stations are very few and difficult to realize, so the Mirai is small in volume, said Nakayama. Yes, even Toyota must admit the Mirai has been a big flop. No one is buying hydrogen cars. It is still hardly selling anything today. Toyota will not get anywhere near their 8-year-old target for 2020 of 30,000 units here in 2023. I'm willing to bet they will never have a hydrogen car model that sells over 30,000 units a year ever. So Toyota is still wasting money, time and effort on a dead technology that we have just killed off in Denmark completely, as we have closed all the hydrogen stations in the country. And Toyota is just now waking up and starting to realize, people actually do want EVs and are buying them in big numbers in China and Europe. So now Toyota has been out saying that EVs are not the right choice for people in Australia. It's much better for people to buy their hybrids. And because the old guys are slowing down on EVs, the former CEO of Toyota is out saying, "See, I told you so, nobody wants EVs." But Toyota continues to be wrong, as we have seen them be through the years, and they continue to be all over the place with many powertrains, even though the customers has already spoken. They don't want hydrogen cars, as in California, the biggest car market in the US and furthest along on sustainable transport in the US. And if it was a country, it was actually the 10th biggest car market on the planet by country. But here, Tesla has already beaten Toyota overall. From January to June, Tesla had the best-selling car of any kind in California, the Model Y, and the second best-selling car was the Tesla Model 3, and then came Toyota's affordable Camry, which sold less than half of the Model Y. But there is no demand for EVs. But what about Europe? Well, the best-selling car in Europe is still the Model Y, but there is no demand for EVs. What about China? The biggest car market on the planet. Well, in 2023 up to August, Tesla Model Y was the best-selling car of any kind, and that did not change with September numbers, as Tesla was also the best-selling car of any kind in September. But there is no demand for EVs. Yes, there is demand for good EVs, but the old guys are not making compelling enough EVs. In China, the biggest car market on earth that is moving fast to EVs, with already 24% of the market being pure BEVs and closing in on 40% plug-in market share, the Germans' most important market. Well, let's look at the entire German auto industry's BEV sales in China against Tesla's single model, the Model Y. Tesla's Model Y is bigger, much bigger, in China than the entire German auto industry's BEVs. Please take a second and let that one sink in. Remember how people screamed about Tesla need more models? Well, here are all the many EV models from the entire German auto industry has to offer for the Chinese market, and they don't even get close to Tesla's one model. Yes, what the Germans should have done was to watch my video about production range architecture to understand that more choice does not equal more sales, quite the opposite, and complicate production. If you haven't seen that video, you should definitely check it out, link down below. But now Volkswagen is also slowing down their EV production ramp because they don't see enough demand for their EVs, and both Ford and GM are slowing down their EV ramp as they do not see enough demand for their EVs, despite the best-selling car model on the planet Earth is an electric vehicle. And the EV market is growing. Global EV market share reached a monthly record in September 2023 with over 1.3 million units sold, growing by 23% compared to the same period last year. Sales in China has also grown by 33% year to date, Europe by 27%, and in the US and Canada by 60%. But because Ford and GM both have ramped up to the insane amount of 36,000 and 20,000 units of EV sales in a quarter, they have to back down again because there simply is not enough demand for such a huge amount of EVs they are producing. 36,000 units in a quarter. Tesla will have sold 36,000 units within the next 8 days. So about 70 to 100,000 EVs in a year is simply too high a production for the demand Ford and GM sees for their EV. Meanwhile, Tesla is going to sell about 1.8 million EVs in 2023. Please let this one sink in before people scream about EV demand. So EVs are rising. Tesla and BYD is rising. The best-selling car on the planet is EV. Volkswagen and Hyundai are no longer selling ICE cars in Norway. Toyota is out admitting the hydrogen car has been a failure, but the old legacy automaker says there is a demand problem for EVs. Now we can see that it's just straight up a lie. What they are missing from that sentence is there is a demand problem for our EVs. And if they lift their foot off the accelerator, you can bet your money that the Chinese will press that accelerator even harder. And unfortunately, it's not a question of if. They have already slowed down the EV production and delayed the EV targets. I really think this is a wrong move. If all the EV adoption trends continue, there won't be much left of the ICE sales after 2030. And it does not have to be 100% BEVs for this to kill the old guys. But China and Europe are moving very fast toward EVs, and with more affordable EVs coming over the next couple of years, both from Tesla and the Chinese automakers, I only expect the EV adoption to accelerate again. So Europe and China could very well be like 80% BEVs by 2030, and that is about 55 to 60% of the entire car market. That is 80% BEVs. And the US will of course also rise up to a much higher number than they are today. So the question is, what will happen to the ICE industry by 2030 if 60 or 70% of their entire business has disappeared? Remember, as we talked about in the beginning, the auto industry has already today 40% more capacity than there is demand today. So if the demand drops another 70% for their ICE business, the overall capacity is going to be too much to bear, and they lose the economy of scale and will have lost huge market share to Tesla and the Chinese as they push through and sacrifice profits for market share. Even though Tesla is still earning a lot of money, they have cut their profits quite a bit with all the price cuts, but not many Chinese are earning money still. Even BYD showed in Q3 numbers they are losing billions now at the moment, probably because of the price war we see in China, and they didn't have much margin to play with, but they will sacrifice the profits to gain market share. So they are all trying to grow as fast as they can. Not all Chinese automakers will survive, of course, but some will, and they will grow fast as the market grows fast, and will take market share from the old guys that is now slowing down for their short-term profits. I do think we are seeing the beginning of the end of the auto industry as we know it. Like when Apple and Google entered the mobile phone market, we also saw the beginning of the end of the phone market as we knew it. Nokia, the undisputed king that was too big to fail, right? Or Motorola, Sony Ericsson, or BlackBerry, and the other big boys. Now the industry is ruled by completely new companies that came from the outside and disrupted the entire industry. And we are seeing the same thing play out in the car industry right now. Companies are making all the wrong moves, and some can't find their way and are trying desperately to find other ways to stay relevant with e-fuel and hydrogen, but the consumer has already spoken. EVs has taken off and are no longer only for the early adopters, but have entered the early majority and therefore have entered the mainstream market. The early majority, which has a more pragmatic approach to the product. Is it useful? Does it really meet my needs? And as EVs continue to rise, the answer is clearly yes, which us early adopters of course already knew, as we have been using the products for many years. But entering the early majority with Tesla here is actually a huge milestone for Tesla, because as a reminder, 70% of startups die or live 2 years after their creation, and this is usually because they are unable to cross the chasm. What we see in this model of the adoption of a new technology, and not many startups actually get to cross that chasm in the adoption curve. But Tesla has, and is already in the mainstream. As we know, Tesla is already pretty much as big as Audi, and BMW and Mercedes are no longer far out in front. Tesla is no longer just in the early adopters phase, in a little niche market. They have already crossed the chasm and have entered the early majority. And when a startup does this, enter the early majority, it's important at that stage they have implemented a scalable product that can thus cope with the high demand without saturating. And this is exactly what Tesla has done. They were ready for the mass market with the ramp up of the Model 3 and then the Model Y. They have survived the early stage and are now as big as the over 100-year-old legacy automakers from Germany. And compared to e-fuel, hydrogen, none of the other technology has even left the ground. EVs will have taken completely over before other technologies even get a meaningful traction. EVs has won, the old guys are losing, and we are entering the new era of the automotive industry. And thank you for watching. And until next time, take care out there and be nice.